to open Eden 2 seminar and the chance for all of us to listen to one of the world leaders of diversity and extinction. We are in a very, very tall building, and I know that our keynote speaker, Professor Pimm, usually before his talk says, don't throw yourself out of a tall building, because there is still so much hope in the domain of biodiversity and species salvation. So we come here, gathered here with a lot of interest, but I think also all of us coming from very different backgrounds and disciplines to see what it is that we can do to protect the diversity of our beautiful planet. Today is a very special day. It was the end of World War I. It's Armistice Day or Remembrance Day. We would also like to continue an Eden tradition to pay respect to the victims of various natural disasters. Japan has been hit by a number of natural disasters in the last month. So with everybody's permission, I would like us to take a minute of silence in reflection to all those who have passed and in gratitude for life. Thank you. This is the second Eden seminar. Eden stands for Emerging and Developing Economies Network. It's the brainchild of my friend and longtime colleague, mentor, Monte Cassim. Those who have worked with Monte Cassim, and there are quite a few from various aspects of his life present tonight, know that he's truly a visionary, but a visionary who's put all his energy and intelligence at the service of the public and the greater good. So when he came up with the idea of creating a platform where we not just talk the talk, but connect the people who walk the walk, and that we would call it Eden, we decided that we all wanted to finish our days in Eden. And therefore, we joined this. The first session was in May. Some of you maybe participated. I know Ambassador was there, Ambassador Fiji. It was dedicated to innovation, sustainability, and reciprocity, inclusion. And we had two case studies. The first was about various ongoing projects on the Sri Lanka platform that Monte Cassim presented, and we also had a presentation by our other colleague, Dr. Funaki, who is here in the room, on the Pacific Island states. So this second session is devoted to biodiversity and the planet's ecology and the question of extinctions, how we can slow them down and hopefully stop them. The speaker is world-renowned Stuart Pimm. He has come to Japan actually because he has been the recipient of the 2019 Cosmos Prize. I confess I didn't know about the Cosmos Prize, and I'm quite ashamed that I didn't know, because it's almost the Nobel of Ecology. And some of the personalities who won it are like Jane Goodall, the chimpanzee lady, I'm sure everybody knows her, and Professor Pimm is the recipient this year, and what a deserving prize and prize recipient he is. He was educated at Oxford, he did his PhD in ecology at New Mexico State University. I was surprised actually because I had always associated Professor Pimm's work with tropical forests, and in fact he told us that one of his first projects was in Afghanistan, and being born in Iran, Afghanistan is very precious to my heart. I spent some beautiful childhood years there, and in fact he came from there for an arid ecology all the way to the tropical forests, and now works also extensively, he was telling us, in China. Professor Pimm is that rare scientist who is not just a conservation scientist, he's also a conversation scientist in that he can really communicate. And he has done so as a teacher, as an activist. He has testified to the US Congress, holding both British and American nationalities. He has spoken about the Species Endangered Species Act to the US Congress. But I think what I have to say, what really impressed me the most is, even at this level, your love of nature really comes across. And as a teacher and an activist, that is such a unique talent. So I'm very, very impressed. I will just quickly go over the program today. Right after, I would like to ask Hassin Sensei to tell us a little bit about the Cosmos Prize, if possibly an education for me. Then we will have our keynote speaker give his lecture, and thereafter we will have a discussant, Professor Park Chung-Hwan from the CEO of PJ Factory, will make some comments and give a short presentation, and thereafter we will have an open Q&A session. It will be mostly in English, but of course we can do also Japanese. We have many elegant Japanese speakers, and Persian, Swedish, Dari, whatever language, any of the islands, Pacific Islands. We will not let language be a barrier. This is also an exchange of ideas and conversations. So, without further ado, maybe I can ask Monty to tell us a little bit what the Cosmos Prize is about.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to Eden 2, and I hope we can share many more Edens together in the future too. Let me tell you a little bit about the prize that Professor Pimm has won, because like Nasreen, many people don't know very much about it in the general public. But it is a very distinguished prize recipient we have this year, selected from somewhere between 100 to 150 shortlisted nominees. The prize was established following the 1990 exposition of flower exposition in Osaka. From the, I would say, the surplus accrued from this exposition, the organizers decided to invest it in a prize, and in a prize for the environment, and how human beings could live together with nature. Now, the theme of the Expo itself was the harmony of man and nature was one of the themes, and also order in the cosmos, in the universe. A universal order that not only reflects human society's orderliness, but also order in every aspect of sustaining life on Earth. And I think this is exactly the essence of Professor Pimm's work today. So, the spirit of cosmos lives on in the work of people like Professor Pimm, and we are extremely happy that he was able to come here today and gather this Eden community. So, with that, I think I will pass the microphone back to Nasreen, and I hope that you are aware that Japan is one of the initiators of this Cosmos Prize and can be very proud of what it has done in a very low-key manner, in a very typical Japanese manner. So I take it upon myself that advocates like us have to speak for Japan, because Japan is rather inarticulate in the global world outside. So anyway, thank you for giving me some time, Nasreen, and I pass the mic back to you.
ado, I would just, before calling on Professor Pimm, I would just like to say that my very first job at the United Nations with the UN Institute for Training and Research was a program funded by the government of Switzerland called Geographical Information Systems and Remote Sensing for Resource Management. This was in the 1980s. The technology was coming from the military sector. NASA was releasing a lot of the technology, and some enlightened countries at the UN asked that scientists from developing countries also have access to these technologies. And I, just fresh out of graduate school, I had the good fortune of working with UNEP and NASA and NOAA, identifying every year 10 to 15 top-notch scientists from Africa, Asia, Latin America. And I can tell you that those formative years, watching these scientists identify the pixels that related to forests and rivers and meadows that they knew, and the excitement of using science for a good purpose, that has really left a mark on me. And when I hear Professor Pimm talk about the young students that he is now preparing and sending out to the world, I have the image of all these scientists from Mali and Ghana, Burkina Faso and Peru, who really absorbed. The science is for everyone if we can make it a level playing field, and nowhere is it more important than in salvaging our ecology and our nature. So this topic is very close to my heart. Thank you for accepting the invitation. I have the floor, sir.
I've got a mic. Can you hear me at the back of the microphone? So I have to say this about the Nobel Prize. Alfred Nobel woke up one morning and read his obituary in the newspaper. He wasn't dead, but he wished he were, because it was very unkind. He invented dynamite. So he decided that when he really did die, that he wanted to be remembered fondly. So he endowed the Nobel Prize. I have just been honored by Japan for a prize that's named after a flower. I prefer flowers over dynamite. The committee that organized this prize asked for the harmonious connection between nature and humankind. I think that's an amazing challenge, because it's going to be the difficult challenge for this century. How are we going to manage our lives in such a way that we protect, we are good stewards of the global environment? And the argument that I'm going to make is not a novel one, it's not restricted to me. It's one of the development goals, it's one of a variety of international targets that says we cannot live harmoniously if we're driving large numbers of species to extinction. If I press that, is it supposed to be the forward-moving arrow? Well, with some, this might take a bit of... Until we debug that, can I ask for the next slide? Okay. What we do? So, how do we know how bad the extinction crisis is? Well, Al Gore, in The Inconvenient Truth, talks about species going extinct 1,000 times faster than they should be. But I just love this poster in a street demonstration in England last year, where somebody holds up a sign that says, species going extinct 1,000 times too fast. This is an amazing honor. My work has never been celebrated in a demonstration before. I was very, very happy about that. Al Gore and this wonderful lady in Britain, I do not know her name, are quoting a paper I did 25 years ago on looking at the rate of species extinction. So I want to tell you where that number comes from, how we know that, and consequently, how we can do something about it. Next slide. Yeah. But the first question, of course, is that now working?
It is working.
Okay, so I can control it on how you do it. So if I press that, it should zoom. I'm always asked why should we care? And I say it's the 3 E's. Ethics, aesthetics, and economics. And I can spell. But I can't always get this. There we go. Part of the argument is ethical. It's discussed in wonderful detail in an encyclical that the Pope produced a few years ago called Laudato Si. It's a matter of what sort of an environment that we pass on to our children and grandchildren. And as the encyclical says, we have no right. We have no right to destroy our planet and leave it to our children in a bad state. But there's another issue too. I'm sorry if this image offends you. My friends in the Amazon tend not to wear clothes most of the time. When we destroy forests like the Amazon, we must not forget that people live there. And these friends of mine there, Warani from the Ecuadorian Amazon, live traditional lives by choice. They live in villages that do not take money from oil companies. They lead traditional lifestyles. And when President Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil encourages people to trash the Amazon, please remember that this represents the murder, the eviction of indigenous peoples. Oops. Oh, sorry. The censor clearly is unhappy with my native people. And I have my native people back. There we go. Thank you. So don't let's forget that when we destroy the environment, there are people within it. Am I pressing the right button? Is it the big button? Big button. There we go. Oh, it is. The next argument is the aesthetic argument. The fact that nature is really wonderful and beautiful, and we celebrate it in so many interesting ways. This woodcut, of course, is a very famous one. It's a series which in English is called 36 Views of Mount Fuji. But what I love about this particular one is the sense that it tells us how big a tree should be. A tree should be so big that several people cannot get their arms around it. We have destroyed our forests so that the ones we have now are still baby trees. We have lost something. When I was last in Japan, I went to Hokkaido in January. My Japanese friends, I hear you take a breath. Hokkaido, January, cold, cold, cold. But I wanted to see this magnificent bird, the red-necked crane. It's a bird that is very, very prominent in Japanese art. It's part of Japan's culture. Like a lot of species, if we lost that bird, we would have lost something about our environment, something about our culture. Of course, biodiversity matters in a purely economic sense. For many poor people in the world, the natural environment is a source of food. These are poor fishermen on the Indian Ocean, near Goa in India. And the diversity of fish is what gives them protein. Biodiversity matters in an economic sense, in complicated ways. African countries earn an enormous amount of revenue from ecotourism. Tourism is the world's largest economic sector. It's growing rapidly, and within it, ecotourism is growing the fastest. Many, many countries depend on ecotourism. That's a trend that's going to continue. That's important. But what about these funny shells up there? These are called cone shells. You don't want to pick one of these things up on the beach and stick it in your pocket. People do, and they die. Because cone shells have a very, very potent poison. And they use that poison to catch fish. I hear your surprise. How can a slow-moving snail catch a fast-moving fish? It darts the fish with a harpoon, paralyzes the fish, and then sucks it in. That particular toxin is a very powerful painkiller, and it's used increasingly for terminally ill cancer patients for whom the normal class of opioid drugs don't work very well. So nature can be an enormously important source of drugs and medicines. And finally, within economics, there are what we call ecosystem services. When we burn the Amazon, we put enormous quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Land use changes, deforestation, puts 1 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere each year. That's more than all the emissions of the European Union. So we need to preserve carbon in forests because it makes good economic sense, particularly if you're a small island nation or Bangladesh or anybody living near a coastline. When we destroy forests, we often get catastrophic floods that cause economic harm. All of these things are what we call ecosystem services, the fact that nature is valuable to So I want to go back to what we know about biodiversity, what's the problem, and what we can do about it. Why did Al Gore talk about extinction being 1,000 times faster than it should be? Why didn't he just say 3 species are going extinct per day, or 30 species are going extinct per day? The answer, quite simply, is we don't know how many species there are. We have names for many species, but there are many species that we do not know. Our knowledge of biodiversity is incomplete. So I want to tackle 4 questions. How many species there are? How fast are they going extinct? How well are we doing to protect them? And how we can do better. Well, we have names for about 2 million species. But we're almost certain that there are many, many more species out there for which we do not have names. And I'd like to suggest a simple mathematical model of what should happen. Supposing there is a new land out there which is full of different species of unicorn, and we begin to describe those species of unicorns. So maybe in the first decade we describe a lot of species. Then in the second, fewer, because we already know some. And the next decade, fewer still, because we now know a lot. And then finally, it's getting very, very hard to find new species because we've already described a lot of them. So we ought to be able to predict how many more species there are in terms of how difficult it is to find new ones. It's a great idea, and it fails very badly. I'm going to skip a few slides so that we get away. And a good example has everything to do with His Imperial Majesty, the Emperor Emeritus. In other words, the father of the current Japanese emperor. Because in my circle, of course, we know he's the former emperor of Japan, but we also know that he's the world expert on a group of fish called gobies. So I have many friends who have met the Emperor Emeritus. If you look at the number of species of gobies that are being described per year, there are more species being described now than they were 20 years ago, 30 years ago. That doesn't make a lot of sense. There ought to be fewer, because surely there are many fewer unknown species. But the reality is that the number of people who describe species, we call them taxonomists. There's more taxonomists now than there were in the past. There is the Emperor Emeritus, hard at work, describing new species of goby. And if you look at the numbers of species of gobies described per taxonomist, you'll see that those numbers are not declining. So we can't predict how many species of gobies there are because there appear to be an unlimited number of gobies. We are only limited by the number of Japanese emperors who are available to do this very important task. So we know more or less how many birds and mammals and amphibians there are. We know that there's about 400,000 species of plant. About 15% are predicted to be undescribed. But for many, many groups of species, we don't know how many there are. So, how can we understand how fast species are going extinct? Well, we can calculate a death rate for species. We can calculate a death rate for humans. We know that our death rate globally is about 8 deaths per 1,000 people per year. If you have a death rate much higher than that, with memorializing the end of the First World War, during periods of war, death rates are very, very much higher. We know that's very bad. So we can calculate the death rates of species. And we can ask, what kind of a death rate would we expect? I'm not going to go through all the numbers. But the basic result is that we know that between 50 and 500 species go extinct per year per 1 million species. So that's the death rate. For humans, the death rate is 8 deaths per 1,000 per year. For species, the current death rate is between 50 and 500 million, between 50 and 500 extinctions per million species per year. It gives us a measure of how much biodiversity we're losing. So, what would we expect that rate to be? Well, what we can do is to understand how fast species are being born. How fast are species created during the process of evolution, during the process of speciation. And thousands of scientists around the world look at the DNA of closely related species, calculate how fast species are being formed. And the answer is somewhere between 0.1 and 0.5 new species per million species per year. So I'm sorry to bamboozle you with lots of numbers, but we have a birth rate, and we have a death rate, and we know that the death rate is 1,000 times more than the birth rate. And that's very bad. And that's the measure of what we're doing to biodiversity. We're driving species to extinction 1,000 times faster than species are being created. So, what are we doing to protect them? Over the last 30 years, nations of the world, essentially all nations of the world, have established protected areas, established national parks. I understand that at your next Eton meeting, you are going to be learning about Afghanistan. And I spent 2 summers in Afghanistan working in the area that became Afghanistan's first national park. So even poor countries, war-torn countries like Afghanistan, are creating national parks. Easier for some countries than others. The green areas on that map are where the world's national parks are. The yellow areas are where wilderness is. And by wilderness, I mean places where there are very few people. And one of the things that becomes very obvious is it's easier to put a national park where there are few people. It's easier to put a national park in Siberia or elsewhere in the Arctic or in the middle of the Sahara. The world's national parks tend to be in places where there are very, very few people. And I understand that. That's what politicians do. They take the easy way out. But does that help us when it comes to protecting species? Does that help us meet the internationally agreed targets on reducing extinction rates? That's important because next year in Kunming in China, the Convention on the Parties of the Conference of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity will meet in China to decide what's the next 10 years of targets that we should try to agree upon to further protect biological diversity. This is an example of a national park that makes Europe look as if it has a lot of protected areas. When you fly from the United States to China, on a good day, you fly right over the northern tip of Greenland. That's the very, very northern part of Greenland. It's 1 million square kilometers of a national park. I had never been on the ground there. I had no intention of being on the ground there. If you thought Hokkaido was cold in January, this is a whole new level of pain. So, I'm sure it's a wonderful place. It looks great from the airplane. I don't think it has many species. So we want to be careful when we ask politicians for more area for protection. We want to make sure that we're asking for the right places. So we can ask an interesting question. We can ask that given that we have protected 13% of the land surface, that's the ice-free land surface, and given that we can look at 50% of the planet that doesn't have many, many people, how well are we doing protecting species? Well, supposing you have a species that has a large range, you would expect that 13% of its range would be in a protected area, and 50% of its range would be in wilderness. If you have a lot of species with small ranges, even like unicorns again, you might expect that 30% of the unicorns, essentially 1 out of 6, would be in a protected area, maybe half of them would be in wilderness, the other half would not. So you should have an idea of to the extent to which our national parks, our protected areas, are protecting species. I'm going to skip the gory details and show you some pretty pictures. These are all species that have small geographical ranges. That's important because species with small geographical ranges are much more likely to be threatened with extinction than species with large geographical ranges. And the fact is that globally we're doing a very good job of protecting these most vulnerable species. It's true that we're creating national parks in the middle of nowhere, which doesn't do us a lot of good, but we're also creating small, focused, biologically important national parks. And we should celebrate that success, and we should ask the politicians that we want more of it. The animal at the top left is a gibbon. It's called the Skywalker gibbon, as in Luke Skywalker from Star Wars. It sort of looks like Luke Skywalker with his hood, right? The little hummingbird on the left was recently discovered. The beautiful little frog on your right is called a poison dart frog. You don't want to touch its skin because it's poisonous. It's sitting there saying, I'm red and black, don't touch me. If you do, you'll die. Its tadpole on its back is quite capable of looking after itself. The fact is that we've done a pretty good job of looking after species with small ranges. We need to do a better job. And that's my final question. No, it's not final. So, my good colleague, Ed Wilson from Harvard University, a former Cosmos Prize winner, has said his idea is to protect half of Earth. The problem with that, Ed, is that just asking for half Earth, if that means the Sahara, more of Greenland, more of Siberia, that isn't going to do us any good. We need to have the right half of Earth. So there's Ed and I having a discussion about this. We are very good friends. I absolutely revere Ed. He's a wonderful man. The idea is that we need to go into the meetings to decide the agenda for biodiversity for the next decade and ask for more of the Earth to be protected. But it has to be the right part of Earth. We have to get the bits of the planet that are important for biodiversity, not just areas that are large because that sounds good. How can we do better?
We can map out the distribution of many species now in considerable detail. These are birds, and they show that the warm, wet tropics are where most of the species are. Mammals show a broadly similar pattern. These are the places with the greatest concentration of species, and it's likely to be true for most species. Amphibians, for example, show a similar pattern, and while we have less detailed data for plants, it's almost certainly true for them too. But just looking at species is not sufficient. We need to dig deeper. Let's look again at the distribution of bird species. In the Amazon, there are the greatest numbers of species. But if we look at where species have smaller than the median range size, those distributions are profoundly different. Concentrate in Central America and the Northern Andes, and in places like the coastal forests of Brazil. That's important because species with small ranges are much more vulnerable to extinction than species with large ranges. So let's take a world tour of where threatened species are. Our first stop is in northern Andes, and Saving Nature is involved in several projects in Colombia and Ecuador, where the habitat destruction combined with the high numbers of small-range species means that there are a lot of species at risk of extinction. Our second area of concern is in coastal Brazil. Again, loss of habitat, concentrations of small-range species means that there are worrying numbers of threatened birds and mammals and amphibians, unlike the many other species in these forests. The final area where Saving Nature works is in tropical Asia. We have 3 areas of interest: the Western Ghats of India, Assam up in the northeast on the borders of China, and the Lusa ecosystem of northern Sumatra. These maps are what we call strategic maps. They tell us where in the world we need to act, but they don't tell us exactly how to act. For that, we need tactical maps, this one, and I'll explain those on the project pages for each of the various places where Saving Nature works.
The point of this short video is that there are critical places in the world where endangered species are concentrated. We don't have to save all of the planet, but we do have to save some key places. We have to set priorities. It's true for the oceans too. The seas south of Japan, for example, are extraordinarily important in unique marine organisms. So is the Sea of Cortez, the Gulf of California. There are critical places on land and in the ocean where there are large concentrations of threatened species. If we're going to save biodiversity, those are the places where we need to go and work. So, I only have time to give you one example. So I'd like to go back to coastal Brazil. Everybody knows about the Amazon. Fewer people know about the fact that Brazil has another rainforest, the coastal rainforest. It has a lot of threatened birds, it has a lot of threatened mammals, it has a lot of threatened amphibians, it has a lot of threatened other things too. And you can see why in this satellite image. That's 3 Landsat images, that's about 500 kilometers east to west. And you can see that not a lot of forest remains. Let's take a closer look at an area just to the east of the city of Rio de Janeiro. When you look at that image, the first thing I see is that there's forest, but a lot of that forest is in very small pieces. In fact, about 15% of it is in pieces of forest smaller than a square kilometre. That's what the forest looks like on the ground. Well, from a helicopter. What you see is a landscape where only small pieces of forest remain. What we've done here is to map where the forest is. We have draped that map over a three-dimensional image of the area to show where the mountains are. And we have color-coded it by the numbers of threatened species that occur there. This is what we call a tactical map. We know this is an important feature, but when we look at that, we see that there is a cluster of areas of forest in the east which contain the greatest numbers of threatened species. That's the front line for saving biodiversity. That's where we need to go. And we know that fragments are bad from an extraordinary experiment, perhaps the biggest ecological experiment ever run, which was organized by Professor Thomas Lovejoy in the Amazon. He worked in the Amazon 40 years ago and knew an area of forest was going to be converted to a cattle pasture, and was able to persuade the rancher to leave behind areas of forest that were 1 hectare, 10 hectares, 100 hectares, 10,000 hectares, and follow what happened to the species in those fragments. And the simple conclusion from this complicated graph is that unless you have fragments that are 10,000 hectares or more, 100 square kilometers or more, unless you have fragments of at least that size, that you are going to have species extinctions. And that is very, very useful science. It tells us that we cannot protect biodiversity if the remaining patches of habitat are too small. If they are too small, the only thing we can do is to reconnect them, is to re-establish connectivity between our isolated fragments. Oops, that did not work. Can you press that again for me? That should be a bit.
Identify places where the greatest number of species are at risk of extinction. And when we do that, we often find they're in very fragmented landscapes. They're not in large areas of continuous forest like the Amazon, but they're in the biodiversity hotspots, and those places have already lost a lot of their habitat. A good example of this is in the forest to the east of the city of Rio de Janeiro in coastal Brazil. This map shows the fragments and the number of threatened species that they contain.
We have not just merely destroyed so much of the world's tropical forests. What we have left behind is in tatters, in fragments. Those fragments are often too small for species to maintain viable populations. There just aren't enough males to go around for the females and females to go around for the males. And of all the places, all the fragments, one that I thought was particularly tragic was the one immediately behind me. This is the Union Biological Reserve in coastal Brazil, about 100 miles east of the city of Rio de Janeiro. Because in this isolated patch of forest are a whole load of species on the brink of extinction, the most charismatic of which is a beautiful little monkey called the golden lion tamarin. And the golden lion tamarins in that fragment could not go forth and multiply into the forest over there because there was the cattle pasture behind me. And when I saw that cattle pasture For the first time, about 8 years ago, a cattle pasture just like the one I'm standing in, I thought, it has to go. So, we have made it go away. This is a restored forest. I helped raise money for my friends at the Asociación Miguel Dorado, the Golden Lion Tamarin Association. I've planted this forest, and it now connects that once isolated fragment of forest in the Union Biological Reserve to a much larger area of forest over in this direction. It's what we call a biological corridor, and it means that the golden line tamarins that were once imprisoned in this forest island, this forest fragment behind me, can now cross through these small but growing trees and go and find new habitats, new homes, new places for their tamarin families.
This is a decade's worth of forest restoration. That's what the valley looked like 12 years ago. That's what it looked like 4 years ago. I couldn't take a picture when I went back this year because the forest had grown up to be so tall that you couldn't see the valley. So, I started out by talking about the world, and I ended up showing you a picture of children planting trees in Brazil. We have children planting trees in Brazil, and Ecuador, and Colombia, and India, Sumatra, a dozen sites around the world. Children are very good, they're small, they're closer to the ground, they work for nothing. Graduate students cost more money, you have to buy the beer. The point is that what we do is to empower local communities. We raise money for local communities. We don't buy the land, they do. They manage it. They employ typically local women to collect the seeds and to grow those seeds into trees that we plant. So we help the economy of local communities. We give people an alternative future from destroying their local environment. There's an expression in American English that all politics is local. That you have to make politics work at the local level. It's exactly the same for conservation. We are committed to helping local conservation groups restore their environments, to reforest their environments. We do it in the places that matter. We do it in tropical countries that contain the greatest numbers of threatened species. And by doing so, I think we afford a future that indeed involves the harmonious coexistence between humankind and nature. Thank you very much. Extra slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pimm, for empowering us. But we need to see those other slides as well. I think you have to come back for a week of training. I would like, without further ado, to ask our discussant to comment both on the presentation and Professor Pimm's work, and also on what as we heard now, what citizen scientists and others can learn from this to act both at the local and the global level. I always tell my students that we learned from the 1990s and the environmental activism that you should think globally and act locally. Since I went to Hiroshima, actually, and encountered the atomic bomb survivors of Hiroshima, I also think the reverse is true. We can also think locally and act globally. We're constantly learning from each other. So Professor Pimm here is someone who has taken some of your ideas and actually given them a new form. Dr. Park is here. Dr. Park is one of the many students who has worked with Kasim Sensei in the past. He wanted to involve citizen scientists in understanding the plant life and the names of plants and nature around them. He started with a very simple idea. Normal people can take photos of various plants and we can create some database, a green database that would allow all of us to share that knowledge. He is now more teaching in Seoul, and he is also the CEO of PJ Factory. He will tell us a little bit more about what he learned from all this and how he's implementing it. Thank you for joining us.
Professor Pimm, thank you for your excellent presentation. Professor Pimm is very famous in my field as well. My academic background as a scientist is limnology and microbial ecology in ocean. He has some excellent work in the area of the SQLV regarding food wellness as well. I think Professor Pimm's presentation gave us macro aspect of the problems. Sometimes the problem cannot be seen in micro scale. Most of us are very stuck with everyday life, our work, that we would not be able to see the environmental problem in macro perspective. But especially for the world leaders, I think it is very important what exactly is the problem. And after that, we can come up with solutions to those problems. And I think Professor Pimm's presentation will pin what the problem is, how we should approach the problems, and what are our next steps are. And you've seen a lot of maps because Professor Pimm was showing macro scale perspective of the environment. And actually my first tool is something to do with the map, and I think in that we associate a certain point. I'm going to present two tools. One is something that we are developing, the Terrain Network project. It is the joint project of the scientists and students and the citizens. We're still in development of those tools, and I'm going to explain about what they are and what we think it's going to do. And the second product is Detail, which is the product of my company. We're going to use this for the Terrain Network project, but also we are trying to monetize, make a monetization with the second tool, where the whole idea is earn the money with the second tool, fund the first project, so that we don't have to ask the government for the money. Okay, so we should talk about the databases because it's all about the database, and all the science are about the database, because science talk about the fact, and the fact is based on those databases. Usually there are numbers. What are we trying to do with the database? We try to understand the subject. By understanding the subject, we are able to predict how it's going to behave. And this is what's really happening in scientific world, but actually this happens in everyday life as well. So let's say this is the subject. you make the observation of the subject, and it is giving you very complicated data. But you gather the data, and inside you create the database and you try to predict what the subject is going to do. But let's say the subject is the Earth, and we're trying to understand the Earth and then try to predict how it's going to change. But with this subject, we have several problems. First one is the vast area to cover. It is huge that all the scientists in the world would not be able to cover the whole world. And second one is unstructured data. And unstructured data means that are the data not with the numbers that you cannot quantify, for example, the pictures and so forth. And in the area of biology or ecology, those unstructured data are very important, and usually those are the data that can be gathered by non-trained individuals. So the first project, Terrain Network project, will deal with how we're going to cover those vast areas. So the Terrain project simply is mapping out the trees. We're trying to create a map of the trees of the world. And we should talk about what the map is. And Professor Pimm showed us a lot. And then my question is, when do you create the map? We create the map to understand something that is huge out of our understanding in size or in complication. So for example, the DNA is too complicated. So you create a map so that you can have bird's-eye view of the whole thing so that you can understand what it is. And also, if the information is unorganized, then you would create a map so that you could understand what it is. So that's why we're doing this. We're trying to create the map of the tree of the world, but the problem is it's the whole world. How are we going to cover it? So the solution is that probably if the NPOs and citizen science and the students are involved in mapping the tree, they would be able to create a map. But the problem is that, as Professor Pimm said, nobody knows how many species of the plants there are. And though it is keep growing, there are a good number of species of the trees, and it is very difficult for non-scientists to identify what kind of species of the tree it is. Therefore, there is an identification difficulty. Now, we want the non-scientists to be involved in creating the map of the trees, but the first step would be identify the tree and then put it in the map. Well, this actually group is in Japan, 48 female singers dancing at the same time. Actually, they were actually mentioned when I had this first discussion about TGM project with the professor at the university. One of the professors said very seriously that some of the people can identify each one of them, even they change the hairstyles, even they change the clothes, they would identify who she is right away. So if we could put this algorithm into a machine so that it can identify the trees, it might work, he said. So we decided to create a system that can identify the tree species for us. It is comprised of the mobile, phone, the server, and web applications. So the person with the mobile application will take the first picture against the background, which shows the very clear contour of the leaf. And the second one is interesting. The second picture will be taken against the sun. Then the GPS data and the time data will be stamped onto these two pictures and will be sent to the server. And from the server, the algorithm will extract something called identification keys. From the first picture, it's going to extract the shape, size, and margin patterns. But from the second picture, what it does is it's going to extract the venation pattern. And with those identification keys, we are now creating the database one, especially the venation database, because there is no venation database exists in the world. It's going to cross-reference and then come up with the matches. And using the time and GPS data of the picture, it's gonna come up with the answer that this is species X. And from the database 2, which we are also creating, it's going to extract the information about database, that species, and then send that information to the smartphone who just send those two pictures. And at the same time, we're going to send identified species location and time to the database so that the system will work together like this. The sender will be able to read about the information about the species of the trees, and we would be able to pin the species of the tree on our map. So if this happens all over the world, theoretically, we think we could be able to create the tree map. So to do this, we created a team consists of 3 countries in the beginning. Now there is a second group. And also we have botanists, ecologists, but we also have the technicians and computer scientists. But we thought that how good, no matter how good the system is, if it is not used, I think it is useless. So therefore, for the implementation, we have some ecotourism specialists and also the environmental education specialists. And also the reason that we began with those 3 countries is because we wanted to include the temperate and tropical regions, because the species are totally different. And also we wanted to include so-called developing regions, because their infrastructure will be very different. If we do not take all these into consideration from the beginning, the system will only work in half, work more or less. So these are the initial members. You can see the picture of Professor Kassem, because he's the one who kidnapped me after my PhD and then made me to work on this. And these are the list of the people who were involved in the very beginning of the project. So the activities that we do is we have monthly meetings at Kyoto University. This is the Japan team. What we do is we discuss about how we're going to develop the system, and also we talk about very various topics. The seminar is open to everybody, and then everybody brings in various interesting topics. And also there are several students who has graduated writing thesis with this project. And when they write a thesis, they usually bring the result of their experiments and they discuss in the meeting. And the students have their own separate meetings. They usually plan on how they're going to do the samplings and so forth. And this is the hotspot. The hotspot is the place that can be conceived. For example, a campus of the university or a park. Because we cannot create a database for all the species in the world. So we pick those hotspots and then we do the samplings. We create a perfect database so that the system will run perfectly once you're in the hotspot. And we're going to increase the hotspot, therefore we're going to increase the species, number of the species in our database. And these are the team, the student team from Korea, the Hamburg University team. What they did was they designed the name tag for the trees. These are the trees that we get the lead samples from to create the database form. And also we try to create a map using the Google map as well. So the Hamburg University campus is another hotspot that we have. Because those Japan team and Korean team never had a chance to meet, what I did was, I'm the one who's going back and forth to meet both teams. What I did was I made them to take this picture and then showed it to the Japan team when I came to the Japan team's meeting. And they made the Japan team to take this picture so that I could bring it back to Korea and show the Korean team. But there was this one chance where those 2 teams could get together, which was my marriage. Some of the members could come to my marriage. So I took that opportunity to have a meeting between Korean team and Japan team, which I do not recommend. But yes, on the very same day of my wedding, we had this joint meeting between Korea and Japan team. And also there is another team, Gyeongsang National University. They were the second, the Gyeongsang National University campus is the second hotspot that we have in Korea. Therefore, the Konkuk University students had some experience, so they come to Gyeongsang University and teach them how to do the sampling and how to create the database. And also we would have the Korean barbecue for. So there is the database one, the lead image database. That is the Venetian database, and the very basic idea of this database one is that we simplify the process of the extracting Venetian patterns by exposing it to the light. And for the reference database, we scan the Venetian patterns. We actually scan the whole leaf. In the field, what we do is, as I showed, we take an image of the leaf against the sun. And this is the image of the leaf that was taken in the field, and that was the extraction of Venetian. And you can see that Venetian could be extracted to the micro Venetian level. And for the reference database, what we do is we scan the leaf, but we present the light from above using the projector. One of the reasons that we use the projector is because I think even in so-called developed countries would have the projectors and the scanners. I think those are not very sophisticated or expensive tools, so that they will have those tools. But the thing is, when I went to Sri Lanka and when I talked to them, they showed me even better tool, and which was much cheaper. So I think these are the progresses in scientific endeavor. People who has the best idea for that reason are the people who is living there. So we might come up with other protocols, but for now, this is how we scan the reference database for the leaf. This was the very first scan that I made because I had a meeting of the very first teaching project group next day, and I had to prove them that I can scan the Venetian. You can see those two stripes that were made by accident, because when I was holding the projector, I moved and then it was unplugged by accident. So those two stripes represent the leaf scan without the light, and you will be able to see the difference very clearly. So in the middle, those are the Venetians when it is exposed to the light, and other two are when the light is not present. And as you can see, the Venetian can be scanned very clear. And I should skip some of the images. This is the precaution when you're doing field work. And this is the image database that we created. But then there is an encyclopedia of the tree that we have to create, which is database 2. And that is something to do with the second tool, the detail. Okay, so the detail is a new image format that allows users to include related images into a spark of the image. So in this image, you see 300 pictures that are embedded in 5 images, and those 5 images are embedded in one single image, which means that single image has 300 related images. So why do we have to put images together? When we understand something in context, not in data. Where scientists are very used to looking at the data and extract the context of it, but it's not for everybody. So when we talk about the trees, tree is a context and there are data. The parts of the bark, the fruit, the flower, and the trees are data of the tree. And when the data is combined, then it creates the context, and context becomes the story or the information, and only the information or the story is shared through the web using the SMS and so forth. So we have created something that can take the data, which will be the images, and then turn it into the detailed format, which will become the context. And So this is the application that we created. I'm going to show you quickly about how you can create the dot detail images. So first, what you do is you take an image of the whole thing. This is the theme. And then you take a detailed image of the thing. Then you would make it into a pointer, and then you would put it into the spot where it is related to. And also, what you can do is you can take an image of more detailed image of part, and then you can put it into the artistic images. Then you would be able to create an image that explains very little details of the subject. This can be used for many purposes, but it's, the one domain that I'm very interested in is the research purposes. If people could take the detailed image of the trees or the plants, and then if they could create the encyclopedia of the trees and plants, that would become the database too of the teaching process. So I will just talk 2 more minutes about the citizens. Okay, the 2 tools that I showed you are the technology, and what technology does is that it enables people to do the things they couldn't do, which was specialized to certain domains or to certain people. Now the science is trying to embrace the non-scientists and then take them in the journey of the scientific endeavors. The citizen science is very popular nowadays. The iNaturalist, which Professor Pimm is very closely related to, is doing very excellent job inside citizen science as well. And in every domain, the citizen science is very. But the thing is that before the 18th century, the science and the citizens were not that apart. It was very close. The electrical experiments were like theatrical shows. That it was executed in front of audience, the normal people. But after the 18th century, it took apart. Actually, before the 18th century, there was no job discipline for scientists because they were not paid for doing the science. But now, I think nowadays, when people think about the scientists, they think they are people who's living in very remote domains. And those images are made with medias. But I think with the citizen science, I think they are coming together closer as they used to be. And what the citizens are now to be included in great scientific endeavors, especially for the ecology, where we need a lot of researchers who has to cover best area. I think the citizen science is an excellent tool for doing such job. Thank you.
So the idea of this last part of our session is to have time to engage. We saw the big picture from Professor Pimm, and we saw exactly how one group of individuals can use that and apply that. I'm not quite sure that citizens and scientists are getting together. If you just read Harari's recent book, *Sapiens*, where he says we are losing control as citizens of science. And this is a wonderful debate and deserves a very long conversation. We have about half an hour. So the floor is open. As I said, if you can, please ask in English. 日本語でも大丈夫です。Please use this chance. We don't get Professor Pimm in this part of the world. If you want to see him more, you can go to Brazil, but I think we have him here. And briefly just introduce yourself, your affiliation, and ask your question directly. Thank you. There are 2 microphones in the room. So maybe I can get us started. Professor Pimm, where do we go from here? In other words, we have this acceleration, we have more resources, we have more awareness. Do we have more passion? Do we have more commitment? Do we have more love to save the earth? Because it really boils down to that. What is your, if you were to look 100 years from now, what would you say about our species and our planet?
Well, I'm a very optimistic person. When the media phone me up, they know that I'm the person that says that species are going extinct 1,000 times faster than they should be. So they want me to talk about all the depressing news, and I don't want to do that. And I'm very encouraged by a number of things. I'm encouraged by the number of just wonderful local groups of people around the world in developing countries who are taking control over their environment. I think we need to empower them, we need to find them resources, we need to encourage them. I'm encouraged by that. I see a lot of wonderful things going on. But the growth of citizen science is extraordinary. When Scott Lowry, who was one of the co-founders of iNaturalist, and I were talking about what we wanted to do when he was a graduate student, we thought that there ought to be a role for citizen scientists. In the first year and a half, iNaturalist got 1 billion observations. We were very excited by that. And now, I saw Scott last week, we're getting 1.5 million observations a month around the world. And now all these very, very clever things where iNaturalist, you take a photograph and you hope somebody will identify it. What this fantastic work does is you take a leaf and the computer tells you what it is. And I think all of those measures are ways of getting young people in particular back into nature. And that's what we need to do. I mean, we want to get children away from the video games. And I think this is the greatest tool for surveying biodiversity, but it has to be used in the field, and I think that's happening.
So you're optimistic?
I'm optimistic. I think there's a lot of things we can do. I'm encouraged by meeting people across the world's tropics who are doing things that matter to them in their countries.
Dr. Park, are you optimistic?
Well, I'm trying to be optimistic. I think the major problem about the environmental issue is that usually we don't really distinctly feel about it. I live in a city, and most of us are living in the city. If you ask me how many butterflies I have seen last month, 7 months, none is my answer. So it is very difficult for us to understand the problem at the very beginning step for solving the environmental issues. I think it is a challenge. So I think, as what Professor Pimm said, I think it is very important that we let the young ones go into nature, see the nature, and they have to first know about what it is they are trying to protect, or what it is they are trying to preserve first. But I think this is a key area. We are very in depth in many aspects. So that I think is a problem, but yes, when I was in the beginning thought that when Professor Pimm gives us a speech, he's going to yell at us and saying that look how many species are being extincted, you shame on you guys, and so forth. I thought, but he is being very optimistic, so I think I should be very optimistic as well. But I think we should go over that first.
Thank you. Yes, we have a question in the back.
It's okay, I don't need a microphone. Thank you. Can you hear me well? Okay. Hi, good evening, Vladimir. I work at Mitsubishi Legal Finance. I actually graduated from Shizenkan University. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for outstanding presentation. To be honest, it's very interesting to see how you're able to look at the biodiversity from a very global. And as a matter of fact, with the technology, we're able to see those. You can actually imagine the scope, rather than when you're sitting in a city, it's very hard to see what's happening, and when you see the news saying that species are dying, it doesn't get your brain until you actually see the scope and the bigger picture of what's happening to our planet. And I very much agree with the point that it takes a lot of time to educate, especially on a local level, to make people involved into into how to use the knowledge instead of damage your own community. And Dr. Park, thank you very much for the interesting idea on how to identify. Now, my question is that when you look to the future, how can you possibly bring it to the next level, the technology that you have with identifying identifying the trees at this point? While I'm optimistic, I'm looking at the world from the point that if you want to involve people as much as possible into doing something, it has to be either economical, meaning it has to give him some benefit either on a materialistic level or on, we are egoistic animals. We like to show that what we do, we like to have benefit for it. So, do you think it's possible to use the technology that you're developing right now with the idea to involve more people to make it economically viable for them? So, you make, the more pictures you make, you get some award, or the more pictures you make, you kind of rank higher, because we are all competing, but through that kind of a game, but at the same time gaining more award. Do you think that would work? Thank you.
I would make a very bad criticism because I don't have any great sense of how to make money. But I have, I think, a very good sense of how to inspire people. And I think there are various models about how you get people to do things. There's no doubt that there's what I call the prostitution model, you pay people. But there's also what I call the field of dreams model, that if you build it, people will come. And I'd be much more successful at the latter. And I think the extraordinary thing about these crowdsourced apps, these citizen science apps, is iNaturalist is not making money off of people. And it's not even having to offer rewards to people who have 1,000 sightings per month. People are just excited by the prospect of going out into nature and having a name for something. That there's no monetary reward in that, There is just a satisfaction of holding your leaf up to your cell phone and having it give you a name for it. It enriches your world in a very non-monetary way. Now, I do have some experience of that at the global level. The most terrifying 1 hour of my career was about 15 years ago, when I got to spend 1 hour of time with Daniel Goldin, who was the head of NASA. I used all my influence to get an hour of his time. He was known to be a complete monster. He wouldn't come into the room unless you were sitting there with your first slide up ready to go. And if he got bored, he would just get up and leave without a word. And I said, I want the world twice. I want complete global coverage of the world using Landsat images from 1990 and 2000. Because up to that point, if you wanted to buy a satellite image, you had to pay $2,000. And if I had a satellite image and you had a satellite image, I couldn't say, I will show you mine if you will show me yours. We weren't allowed to share. So I said, I want the world twice. I want complete global coverages in 1990 and 2000, free for everybody in the world. And he said, we don't do that at NASA. All we do at NASA is to develop new technologies. And I was ready for that question. And I said, you're not going to have new technologies if you can't encourage people to play, to have new ideas. You're not going to make any money out of this whatsoever. And NASA is in the Department of Commerce, it's a commercial enterprise. I said, I want the world twice for free for everybody now. And I got it. And of course, without that, there wouldn't have been Google Earth and all sorts of other things. Now, when we look at that imagery, we think, ooh, Landsat, it's so crude. We expect to have really high-resolution imagery of the world every day. And so the entire remote sensing community has gone into the business of having fun, of playing, of putting stuff out there, and developing a whole bunch of new ideas. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people out there making money, but there's definitely a role for getting down on your knees to Daniel Goldin and saying, please, can I have the world twice, because it's going to be fun.
I think your question is about the motivation. When I was thinking about that topic, actually I turned into the papers that Professor Pimm said maybe we should turn the young one's eye away from, which was the game research papers that was related to the video game, social network games. They were talking about what motivated people to put their images in social media, which does not bring them any commercial benefits. Other than money, economical benefits, people look for a lot of things, I think. And economical benefit is one of the tools that, one of the resources they require for the existence. But for humans to exist well, they need more than that resource. They need the interest of others, they need the connections, they need the fame, they need the honors. Those are other motivations that are as popular as economic benefits. And people do go for that. One of the good examples about citizen science is something called 4D. It's in the field of molecular biology. What they do is they try to predict the shape of the protein body. The thing is that the shape of the protein determines what kind of function it's going to do inside the body. What they are trying to predict is the shape of the protein that is related to cancer, HIV, and cold. A huge topic, very difficult questions. The difficulty in predicting those shape of the protein is because it can be formed in many ways. Therefore, what they do is they run through the computer simulations and then look into the result. But the thing is, if you run through the computer simulation, it usually shows you a shape of certain trend. Therefore, after all, the scientists had forged it by themselves to see the various patterns, but there were limitations. So what they did was they created a game of forging the protein, and they made it available for everybody. And in the beginning, the people said, who would play such a game? But the fact that they are dealing with such a huge issue motivated people, and they were able to find out the shape of the protein that was related to the HIV. They were looking for it for 30 years or so, but they could be able to find that within a month once they released the game. And they published that in Nature, and also they put the player of the game in the paper as well. So I think there are more than the economic benefit to motivate the people, and there was, I think, one good reason.
Thank you very much. My name is Dawn Fujimoto, and I'm a language teacher in intercultural education. I'd like to know about the problem of invasive species, both for plants and animals, because our world is not stable. I mean, it's always changing. But some of it is caused by human intervention, humans, for economic benefit, moving kind of fish to one part of the world, or plants, planting certain kinds of crops in certain areas that were not indigenous to that area. And so I just would like to know if you address this problem and what can be done about what is really a destabilizing.
Maybe two or three questions. I think there was one also there and here. Here starts with this, and then third one.
Malay from Akita International University, 1 hour flight distance from here. I have a question to Dr. Pimm. By the way, thank you very much for your fascinating presentations. And I just curious, you've been working with local people in Amazon, and you might have heard about their local traditional knowledge, wisdom, or total superstition, whatever you call it. But then when it comes to discussion, collaboration with local people, but you may be using Chinese-based knowledge. How do you sort out those two, somewhat contradictory? How do you integrate, rebuild those two?
So maybe these first two questions will explain the invasive species and working with people.
Invasive species are the second leading cause of extinction. About 25% of all plants occur on islands up to the size of New Zealand. And islands are greatly threatened by invasive species. I've not been to Okinawa yet, high on my list of priorities. But I'm fairly certain that, like most islands, small islands, invasive species are going to be a problem. Very expensive to take care of, but the profession is getting better and better at eliminating particularly invasive animals like rabbits and goats and cats, rats, from islands of increasingly large size. It's a seminar in itself, it's a major problem we need to stop moving species around. The issue of indigenous peoples is interesting and multifaceted. Being in the forest with my Warani friends, no clothes and all, is an amazing experience. It's actually quite terrifying, because they were born in the forest, so they have no sense of being lost. You know, home is the forest, so if you wander off and you have to spend the night in the forest, you're just spending the night at home. That's very disconcerting if you're a Westerner who doesn't particularly want to just, scrape the leaves and sleep on the floor. There are some things that they know extraordinarily well, and some things that they are very ignorant about biologically. I think the important thing is to respect their knowledge, to respect the fact it's different, but above everything else, to realize that it's their choice what to do with their world. And in many ways, it's a great advantage being British, because no other country in the world has interfered with so many other countries for so long that it gives you a great sensitivity about not doing that anymore. So we work with local communities to let them get on with what they're doing. What my former student is doing with the Warani is, however, to codify, to record traditional knowledge. The gentleman I showed you, Penty and Moy, were born as nomads in the forest. They have amazing amounts of traditional knowledge. Their children were educated in Spanish-speaking schools and were taught to despise traditional knowledge. And now my student, Jara, is helping the grandparents teach the grandchildren about what they know, but recording it with sort of modern technology, with cell phones, with cameras, making sure the traditional names, the traditional natural history is recorded. So I'm not a purist, but I do see that there is a chance to use technology to make sure the children begin to learn what their grandparents knew and what their parents had taught them.
I hope you also respected the Warani dress code when you went to visit. We'd be very curious to know. There were two more questions there. Yes. Briefly, yes, please.
It's not so much a question, it's kind of a comment. I teach drawing, I teach drawing workshops to corporations and people who think they can't draw, and it's to help them remember. So I often have people draw a leaf from memory. What's their favorite leaf? They can't even do it. They just draw a little symbol. Then I project a picture of a leaf on the screen. I say I'm going to show it to you for 10 seconds, and then draw it from memory. They can hardly do it. And then I hand out leaves that I've collected and pressed and dried. They spend about 2 hours drawing the leaf. And I've had like groups of 25 engineers who think they can't draw at all, and they're just going, this leaf is so beautiful. I had no idea. And the workshop was supposed to go till 6. They didn't want to stop. They went till 9 at night. They're just looking and drawing. And another time, I had a group go climbing up the mountain, collect something to draw, and come back. And one guy who was really skeptical about it kind of picked up a dirty rock. That, yeah, it wasn't good enough. And he spent 2 hours drawing the rock. And he said, this rock is so beautiful. Look at the wrinkles and the dirt. Maybe when I go home, my wife will also be beautiful. Just in drawing to wake people up. So maybe when you read skeptical people, you can say, draw a leaf from memory, and they won't be able to do it. And then they'll kind of be more open to what you have to offer, maybe.
Thank you, that's a very important point. You can only love that which you can know. We always learn that. Thank you, Christy. Yes, we have further.
Forgive me for standing up. Okay. I hear from what you're saying, Dr. Park, the motivations for people wanting to be connected and do something with meaning. And Dr. Pimm talking about the older people wanting to pass on their knowledge from what they learned as children, pass that on to their grandchildren. Have you any plans, instead of saying, oh, we want the young people, to go out with their cell phones? I've got a front row seat on retiring workers in Japan. They've all got smartphones. Is there any plan to engage that hugely growing demographic to go out? They've got the time, they've got the equipment, they've got the interest, the knowledge to build up a database, because they're very interested in recording and contributing to a larger effort. And the young people are really good at looking at a huge mass of data and saying, what can we use from this? And sort of divide and conquer. Have you considered engaging in this growing senior sector that's going to be exploding across Japan, Korea, China, and most of the nations?
Okay, yes, I do, and I think that is very precious resource that we can work with. That's why when I was developing the app, I was especially very concerned with the font size of the text. Trying to make it as simple as possible so that from 7 years old boy to 17-year-old person can use the app. When one of the engineers said that their mother and father has been retired and they climb the mountains every day to exercise. What they do is they take hundreds of pictures of the plant. So yes, I am very well aware of that. And what I try to do is, I know that more and more as people go old, and when I get to the old age, I think I will be included in that project. But they are kind of excluded from these technologies. That only the fast catchers and young people are targeted when they are making the UX interfaces and those technologies. Yes, I'm aware that I think the population of the elderly people will grow larger and larger, especially in Korea is actually growing. And yes, the technology we should include those people in this kind of meetings.
So, thank you for thinking about the font size and people in their 70s. Retirement age begins at 60, 65, and they all know how to enlarge the screen if need be. If you just open up the opportunities for people, and not just young people.
So I show you my last slide, which was a bunch of school children planting trees. But you might have asked, from whom did they get those trees? And the answer is from grandmothers. Because we, or this our partners, recruit grandmothers to collect the seeds and grow the plants. We find their husbands are completely worthless. The husbands typically want to look after their chickens and their cows. But the grandmothers are really smart. And I wish I'd have had time to show you some pictures of them, because one of my fondest memories was there's this wonderful woman, absolutely no training whatsoever. I'm not sure she can read or write, but she has learned how to collect seeds and how to germinate them. She is completely self-taught. She's worked it out all by herself. If you ask her how she does it, it will take you at least a day for her to tell you about each species. And as a consequence to this, 2 years ago when I was there, she was having a cement floor laid down in her home and was putting beautiful blue tile on it. Now the significance of that is, I think, the biggest change in a person's life is when they go from a dirt floor to a tile floor. That is a huge step up. So she has this beautiful tile floor. Her husband is still looking after the chickens. And you know what? If it was a young person doing that, they'd be thinking about how they were going to, commercialize the enterprise, how they were going to, grow their business to be large. She is very happy to be a nursery woman. She's going to stay in that community. She's lived there all her life. I think, we have to recognize that there are different segments of society who can do really wonderful and different jobs.
Thank you. I wish we could, if it's a very quick question, yeah? One question, maybe last question.
Thank you so much. My name is Ayumi, and I work for utility or power generation company. And I would like to know just a quick your views on the current modern cities, because I think more and more people, at least in Japan, are want to work in the urban cities, and the urbanization is going on, and local communities is decreasing, and it seems like in the cities we have less attachment to the nature. And so I was wondering how this social demographic change can affect the current ecosystem, and how can we rebuild the sense of attachment to the nature again. Thank you.
I think there are increasing numbers of studies that show that as we become more urban, and we are becoming more urban, all the countries are. Countries like China, it's part of the plan. China has a 5-10-year plan to move, tens of millions of people to cities to provide, services for them. The studies that I'm talking about show very clearly that people are happier, work better, and healthier if they're surrounded by green spaces. And I think if we ignore that, we're going to pay a very, very heavy price for that. I think we need to have those green spaces very much for our health and very much for our efficiency. People just work better if they can walk in nature for a few minutes.
Thank you, and to both speakers, and I'm sorry for the others who wanted to ask questions. We should start in the morning next time. Dr. Pimm comes. I think as I'm sitting at a panel of optimists, I cannot bring in my Middle Eastern pessimism, but it seems to me that mainly the first group of people we need to educate are the politicians, because after having had the 1992 Earth Summit in Brazil, the current president of Brazil thinks that there's nothing better than to burn its Amazon forests. The US administration thinks that the future is in coal mines. That's how we're moving forward. And in my country of birth, Iran, the regime has a big onslaught on ecologists because supposedly by observing cheetahs in the wild, the ecologists may be criminals and spying for the West. So politicians need severe education. They need to go to the Warani Indians and get lost in the forests to get a sense of the power of nature. But everywhere else, you are both right. Everywhere else, people are moving and realizing we really need nature. To wrap up this session before President Kasim closes, I would like to give the floor to a friend of Ritsumeikan and Shizenkan and now Eden, Professor Kumagai from Akita International University. I know very well Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University, and I consider it one of the best in Japan. But I am told that Akita International University does the same by mixing a large group of international students with Japanese students. And it's a real pleasure that you have come. Professor Kumagai is directly in your field of topic. He has studied the protected areas of Japan, especially the magnificent Shiotoko in the north, so he will be the right person to bring us back to nature and close the session. You have the floor. Please give a round of applause.
Thank you very much for your kind introductions. I am here tonight with Dr. Norihiko Suzuki, President of Akita International University. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this fascinating seminar. We've been impressed with interesting, encouraging, inspiring presentation. Thank you very much. I'm glad to see your last slide, Dr. Pimm. You showed IUCN logo. I've been working with IUCN. I am an active member of World Commission of Protected Area for the past 10 years. I notice some commonalities between what you have done and what I am doing. I am working closely with Ministry of Environment in Japan and also governments in Asia to expand the coverage and number of protected areas. There are lots of challenges. The population is growing and economy is growing. More energy is needed, water is needed, food productions have to increase, and the tremendous pressure to land, the land where we should protect. Well, you briefly talking about area where being protected by legislation, area where should have been protected, but nothing. There's a huge gap, I know. Fortunately, I have chance to work in key biodiversity areas in Asia. The challenge, as you know, is there are people living there. They've been living there for centuries. And they rely on natural resources in the area. And they have to survive. The challenge for me is how to reconcile conservation biologies, conservation biodiversities, and maintaining their environment. So we don't have any intention to teach them. We just listen and working with local people. And I learned quite a bit out of that experience. One important lesson I got out of this experience is that conservation is mega project. It's a mega science. And we have to deploy not only biologies, ecologies, wildlife management, but also political science, economics, anthropology, perhaps, and many other things. Well, we from small liberal arts college, 1 distance from here, we are trying to introduce sustainability program in the future. Their students can learn about conservation and learn about biodiversity. To me, that would be very, very ideal place for students to study those things, because they can study not just biodiversity, conservation, sustainability. They also study many other things. We are liberal arts college. I have noticed there is potential for events Shizenkan and AIU to collaborate is the future. In fact, one student, she just asked the question, she just graduated from AI. So I'd like to explore how we can make that happen. Really excited about future collaboration. Thank you very much.
So I'd like to wrap up now. Should I give you the floor? Yeah. Should I announce the project? Yes. So I will finish, and my responsibilities are over happily for you and for me. But I do want to say that next Eden seminar will be on January 31st, 2020. I hope you will come, and by then our partnership will have extended and deepened. I hope that not just his good blessing, but his advice will be sent by Professor Pimm, and I hope Dr. Park will work with us. The reason this session will be devoted to Afghanistan is, I went to Afghanistan when I was a child. I remember the large oak trees and maple trees in Kabul in the 60s. All of that was destroyed by war, by hunger, by ignorance. And when I went back after almost 40 years to Kabul in 2002, I was devastated to see that the city that was really a green city, very high altitude, blue sky, green trees, was just rubble and dust. My institute worked for about 15 years with a number of Afghan professionals from across the board, and that program is wrapping up, and as a next step, we want to create botanical gardens in Afghanistan. There are no botanical gardens in Afghanistan. In fact, there are no botanical gardens in about 40 countries around the world, which is, if you think of it as a scientist, as a citizen, young or old, is a catastrophe. If you don't have a library of your plant life, how are you going to even think about what will happen to your natural environment with climate change and with other changes in our environment? So we are starting next year with help from various partners in Japan, in Asia, an initiative to create botanical gardens. We're going to start with the city of Herat, which was historically part of the Silk Road and was known as the City of Gardens, and we take the lessons of Professor Pimm. I cannot tell you how timely this session is. Corridors and connections. We need to create botanical gardens that are nimble, that will withstand big changes, will withstand wars and conflicts, and will just keep growing and allowing people to appreciate their natural life. So this session has been very rich to me. I hope it has been for you too. It is an ongoing journey. I don't think this ever stops. But truly, I remember when I went to the Miho Museum. How many of you have ever been to Miho Museum in Shiga? Miho Museum is a spectacular museum that is practically in the middle of a natural forest, primeval forest, and dedicated to the arts of ancient civilizations with collections from Greece, Egypt, and Persia. And I finish on this note, and I think Professor Pimm will recognize this is what my ancestor, the Emperor Khosrow, said in the 6th century. It is written at the Miho Museum. He is quoted as saying, "I have sought the best course of action most pleasing to God, and have found that it consists in that whereby sky and earth continue to exist, the mountains remain immovable, the rivers flow, and the earth is kept pure." So thank you for coming. Thank you, Dr. Park, and thank you, everyone. Now our president will have the last word. Thank you.
I think that should have been the last word. But anyway, thank you everyone for coming today. We are most pleased that we are doing this in Nihonbashi, because Nihonbashi is corporate capital of Japan and one of the corporate capitals of the world. And I noticed that biodiversity is not very easy to get across to the corporate world large today. I think it will change in the future. And the reason I say this is because about 20 years ago, when I was doing work on climate change, I could get no money for it. I used to get it for cleaning up industrial processes and then siphon off some of the money for climate change. And today, you get money for climate change. And we are doing exactly the same thing. We're putting off a little bit of that for something else. Unfortunately, I think that is the way the world works. But we mustn't give up. And I think these two speakers today have shown us that hope is absolutely important, and hope grows when you do. So I think I would like to share with you two things. These journeys will have ups and downs. I have had moments of great sadness in working in biodiversity. And one of those sad moments was in my home country, Sri Lanka, where driving along a road that has just been liberated after nearly 25 years of war, I see a small herd of elephants standing by the roadside in a little bit of fragmented forest that had been left to them after the guerrillas had mined several areas around it and the military had gone further. And the sadness in the eyes of the elephant was the sadness that you are now trying to relieve. But there are also moments of great happiness. And one of the examples of this happiness is actually sitting there right at the back next to my daughter. Hatano-san, can you stand up, please? Now I'll tell you why he is a moment of great joy. I took for 10 years 19-year-olds in their second year of university, and I would only teach them one thing before I took them into the tallest rainforest in the world. In northern Borneo, I would take these students, not tell them anything beforehand, just thrust them into this large green cathedral, and you'd see the magic flowing into their eyes. That is the moment of exhilaration. And he was one of those 19-year-olds several tens of years ago. And as an earlier student, he started his own company, very much like Pakistan has done. And he is, to this day, employing lots of people and imbuing into them this sense of the importance of this great and diverse world that we have. So I think, you will sit, I think with all our ups and downs, going forward is what I think our two speakers have shown us. We will go forward to the next seminar on the 31st of January, which is on Afghanistan. Again, we will have to mix, I think, sadness with exhilaration, but it is important that we go forward. So please, you are now part of the community of Eden, Edenites. Please help us on this journey and keep coming to the Eden seminars. Thank you very much.